Welcome to this latest video from DPP Planning. One of the biggest challenges facing the country is what's going to happen to our town and city centres, particularly when it comes to retail, both from the impact of the pandemic, but also because of the shift to online shopping. Joining me today is DPP Director Bob Robinson, who's going to talk to us about town centres and their future. Hello, Bob.
Hello.
So, what significant structural changes have happened to town and city centres in recent years?
Well, there has been a gradual shift towards more and more online shopping, which followed on really after the shift from town centres to out of centre retailing. The increase in the amount of online spending, particularly in comparison goods, is now quite significant. I think towards the end of last year, something like 19% of all retail purchases were online, and really compounded by the loss of non-essential retail during the pandemic. That has now leapt to, I think it's close to 25% on the latest figures. So it's been a fairly significant shift. Now, the interesting thing is whether or not those changes will be reversed. I'm not convinced that people will be that keen to go back to town centres in quite the same numbers that they did previously, because they've become used to the convenience and perceived cheapness of online shopping, increasingly so. But also a lot of the fascias that drew people to town centres are no longer there. And I think there'll be potentially a few more casualties on that front as well. So I really do think there's going to be an increased shift towards a more broader experience in town centres. So, for example, more entertainment spaces, more flexible use spaces, potentially shop units becoming click and collect pickup facilities. So I think the nature of town centres will change. I think there's a future for town centres, but in a very different way.
So, from a planning and development point of view, what has to change to to attract people into town centres and maintain some sort of vibrancy, sort of almost return them to their original uses where they were a hub for communities?
Yes, I think increasingly there needs to be a need to look at the broader range of factors that attract people to town centres. They become more social spaces. So I think the idea of having primary shopping frontages, for example, is probably history now, because the type of uses that will bring people in will not be shops. They will be restaurants, they will be exhibition spaces, event spaces. That will be the reason that people visit town centres, not shopping, increasingly. And in that sense, I think recent changes that have been announced by government to increase the flexibility in commercial uses is probably a very good thing. I'm less convinced, though, that allowing uncontrolled access for residential uses is necessarily beneficial. I think because there needs to be a proper consideration of the interface between different uses, particularly things, for example, like music venues, where we have the agent of change policy introduced last year, which has been very important in allowing music venues to continue, making sure that they aren't impacted by new residential development. My fear is that all that will now go out of the window and could potentially damage town centres, not because of the loss of the music venues themselves, because I think they may be caught up in the protections to being offered to things like pubs and libraries. But it's more the indirect problems of building houses in close proximity to such uses without the proper provision being put in place to enforce the agent of change principle.
So in the past, one of the challenges to the high street and the town centres was out of town shopping. It looks like that they're suddenly finding themselves in the same position as town centres as a result of this shift to online shopping and from the pandemic. Obviously, the most high profile being into the shopping mall owner going into administration. What's going to happen, do you think, to those sort of development sites, and will they see a change of use?
Some of them obviously will be repurposed again for town centre and other commercial uses under new ownership. there will have to be new lease and rental arrangements, etc. But I think that's probably been a long time coming. In certain cases, I think the asset value will plummet so much that people will look to alternative uses. An obvious repurposing of that sort of facility would be logistics and distribution linked to online shopping, or again, click and collect facilities. But I think in certain cases, you can probably also look at using them for residential development. One of the beauties of such locations being under unity of ownership is that the sites can be assembled and redeveloped quite easily. So I honestly can see quite a number of them being reused for residential development.
Oh, thanks. Well, that was a really interesting insight. Stay tuned for some more videos from DPP where we discuss a range of issues relating to planning and the property industry in the UK. And we'll see you again soon.